everybody here and get our program started, and then we'll have a discussion. This episode of Plan Z Live is on Fix It Yourself, or Repair in a Pandemic. It sort of seems like the Great Depression and other periods in time that these DIY skills, such as repair, becomes essential again. And I expect that all of us have had to repair something at home during this time. But, we're going to be talking about sort of both the need to repair things, household items, replace or upgrade components. There's a lot of information on the internet how to do it. But what interests me about some of our groups here is how do we support others doing it? Kyle Wiens has started ifixit.com many years ago, 16, I believe, 15. And,
that's right.
I think today you call it a repair manual site, and you happen to also sell tools and components, but, having good information on how to do a repair is essential. And so that's what Kyle's done. He'll be talking to us about that. Peter Mui, a longtime friend, and about 10 years ago started Fix-It clinics in the Bay Area. And these are in-person, drop in, talk to people, bring something from home and say, why doesn't this work? And have someone walk you through that process. So welcome, Peter. And then Elise and Adam Spontarelli are from Vector Space in Lynchburg, Virginia. It's a makerspace there. And they've been doing virtual repair cafes, about 4 of them, I think, over the last period of time. And so as Peter's been doing virtual Fix-It clinics, these are sessions like this on Zoom where people show up and say, hey, can you help me take something apart or figure out what the problem is? Virtual repair cafes, I believe, are kind of a worldwide thing. There's I don't know whether they're connected to each other, but you can find lots of them going on, or at least the repair cafes. And the virtualization is a little different. So let's dive in here. And Kyle, you've been so passionate about this topic for a long time. I want to give you some room just to, you've been trying to get more people to fix things for a long time, and even things that become more complex like electronics devices. So, but you also are thinking in global terms about why this is important.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we have to be more connected with our things. We're like living on a planet with finite resources, making things faster and faster and faster, and then they don't last very long. I have here, this is I have this very cool Internet of Things dog tracker. I have a husky, and the husky is very active, and she runs all over. And fine, so this it's got geofencing, so it will like text me and say, "Hey, the dog escaped." And so then I go find the dog. It's very useful. However, this company did not build a plan in place to for the battery to be replaced. And so the product dies after 2 years, and then it's just done. Go buy a new one. And that is the trajectory that the world is on. There's going to be consumables built into everything, and the whole world is going to turn disposable if we don't do something about it.
Or they go out of business.
Or they go out of business. Yeah. So, I popped this thing open, and it turns out, yep, there's the battery, and it's not. I mean, it's soldering, but it's not hard to replace the battery. We call the company, and they have no plan for it. So, I think so. The act of fixing things is a little bit of resistance. It's social resistance, maybe political resistance against what is not necessarily a conspiracy, but it is the status quo of disposability, and we're pushing back against that.
Okay, good. Peter, tell us, if someone who's not been to a Fix-It clinic, what happens?
So I say it's kind of like an AA meeting for broken stuff. So people show up, and it's very friendly. So my name's Ted, right? This is we say, "Hi, Ted. This is my DVD player. When I put a disc in, it throws an error," and we say, "Well, we're not sure, but here's a screwdriver. Start taking it apart. When you have it open, we'll all come take a look." And I tell the Fix-It coaches to act like they're doctors on grand rounds going to a hospital. So we try to touch each item lightly. We try to empower the person to affect their own repair. we're basically trying to deploy these critical thinking skills throughout civilization. Because we very early on realized that even if we were able to hold fix-it clinics 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, most stuff would still end up in the landfill prematurely. So we have to try and deploy this ethos of repair out into the civilization, this idea that everything should be repairable. And then to go to the next step with Kyle, to start to look at the things that we are getting that are mass manufactured and say, how could this thing have been designed so it could have been more durable, more maintainable, more serviceable? And that's why we're teaching more and more fix-it clinics at
Right.
colleges and universities to teach the next generation of practitioners how to engineer for durability, maintainability, serviceability, repairability from the very get-go. And
Yeah.
I think that's the future we need to lead to for the coming circular economy. We're
Yeah.
never going to make it if we don't start thinking that way.
Yeah, and obviously, sort of, there's this thing of manufacturers kind of like to present their thing as a black box, as you don't need to know what's going on inside. You don't need to know what kind of battery it has, and it's one of the things I think this is very much connected to, like, the open source movement is you really should be saying as much detail of what the components are that something is made out of. And what the specifications are. It's not just a battery, it's a specific type of battery, and it's sourced from somewhere. They usually didn't manufacture it. And that trail all the way back to source, what the source of the product was, is I would really like to see that kind of documentation provided by manufacturers.
Yeah, I would go even a step further,
Yeah.
Dale, in that we're finding now that even the discrete components like electrolytic capacitors, their quality, we don't know who's the lowest cost supplier in China for electrolytic capacitors. And if one of those fails, it takes out an entire power supply for an entire computer.
Yeah.
So we're looking even at that level of how do we make that stuff more robust? Why isn't that stuff like bulletproof at this point? It should all be mil-spec at this point rather than us sort of like still guessing at it.
Yeah. Elise and Adam, thank you for joining us. And tell us, Elise, you're executive director of Vector Space, and Adam, I believe you're director of education, but you're co-founders of it. And how did you decide that you wanted to hold virtual repair cafes?
So we, like lots of makerspaces, when COVID hit, we started in on PPE and we made face shields for several weeks and incubation boxes and lots of necessary items for the healthcare industry. And then we could see after several weeks of that it stopped being all consuming, right? We could see sort of a horizon in which we were going to have time to do something else. And so I looked back at our programming. So typically, the way our makerspace operates is not like a small PPE factory. And so I looked at our programming that we do throughout the year and thought about what would be most useful for our community at this time, right? And so we do a repair cafe, a physical repair cafe where people bring in their things about twice a year. And it's, a free service, a open house. And I decided, when thinking through what the community needs and how we can add value in other ways and to other audiences, Repair Cafe is one that came to mind. So, with a little bit of tweaking to make it fit the parameters that we're living in. We did that. Yeah,
and so do people come and present their thing that they need fixed, and you have people there to give comments on it, or?
So no, it's a little bit different than the Fix-It clinic. It sounds like what we did was we put a call out for broken items. There's a form that people can fill out and say, like, this is what I have that's broken, because we can't fix everything. And then they bring in the item, drop it off, and then as it's repaired, it's recorded, and then we share that with the audience.
Okay, what are some of the things you've repaired?
So the first thing we repaired has been the hardest by far, and speaking to the black box economy, it was this children's toy robot, and I'm blanking on the name, Anakai Cosmo robot. So it's like this little robot that you control with your smartphone, and it has like a lifting arm like a forklift, and the arm wasn't lifting right. So it took me a few hours to even open it up. I mean, if you watch the video, of course, I compressed it down to, a minute and 30 seconds that it took me to open it up, but it was quite a bit more difficult than that. And I finally get in there and find the gear that's broken. I can see what's wrong with it. And so I go to their website to order a new one. I mean, I imagine there's a box just filled with hundreds of thousands of these gears, right? I mean, it's tiny. And of course, there's a statement on their website that says, we do not sell any spare parts or offer any service for these products whatsoever. And that's when I started thinking, am I able to make this? It was so small. I knew I couldn't 3D print it. We thought about machining it. And in the end, another member at the makerspace said, why don't you just buy another broken one and pull the gear out of that one? So that's what I ended up doing. That was the cheapest strategy. Yeah.
So harvesting. Yeah. Peter, what are some of the things that you see commonly repaired at Fix-It clinics, or even uncommonly repaired?
A lot of kitchen appliances. So a lot of toasters, blenders, stick blenders, anything you see in Best Buy or Target is what we see. The most unusual things that come to mind are, we saw a Geiger counter once, a densitometer for measuring radiation. And we saw this parrot backpack. Someone wanted a backpack to carry their parrot around with them in the neighborhood. And the parrot had pecked through it in various places. So, beyond consumer electronics, we do a lot of fabric and textile repair as well at Fix-It Clinic. So that was kind of a very unusual item to see.
Kyle, in one of the first, I think, an article I wrote in the first Make magazine was my daughter had an iPod at the time, and her headphone had broken off in the earpiece.
Yep.
And like getting in there to take it out and take it apart, it really was an arcane thing of heating something up to release the glue. And it kind of but it led me more or less to you guys say that how manufacturers require specialized tools, or they're using specialized screws that most people, it's not a Phillips or not a flat screwdriver. So I know you've kind of solved for that in providing tools, but they kind of go to ingenious ways to make it hard to open something.
Yeah. And this is, part of it is they're not thinking about repair. Part of it is there's a new set of, we have new gizmos, and the way that things have been fixed in the past shouldn't necessarily be the way that things are fixed in the future. So with the headphone jack, we have found this really cool invention that's a very thin piece of metal that you can, if you have a headphone jack that's busted off, it's called a grip stick. You shove it in there, it goes around the headphone jack and it'll pull it back out. And so that's a way of non-invasively saving things with busted off headphone jacks. The other piece of it is learning to deal with glue. The Maker Manifesto says use screws, not glues. But there is glue in the world. And so like in order to get this dog tracker open, I put the hairdryer on it and put a clamp on it and was able to unglue it. It wasn't that bad, but you have to realize that you're dealing with glue and use techniques appropriate to that.
Right. There obviously are a set of techniques to do this, and most people probably don't know them, and they don't do it enough to acquire a body of it. On the other hand, there are probably some people that really love doing it and kind of look at something and say, I know how to get at it. But I think in many ways, both the internet and what you're doing is try to close the gap between those who are expert at doing it and those who know nothing about it.
Yeah, repair knowledge, the knowledge of how to fix everything in the world is out there in the world. It's just not evenly distributed.
Yeah.
So Elise knows how to fix something that Peter doesn't know how to fix, and vice versa. And that's, if we can get together, it's that exchange of knowledge. It's that community right.
But Peter, in some ways, how do you create the awareness that people can fix things, that we don't just throw it away? People, it takes some work to do this, and not just knowledge, but I always thought that people who like to fix things, I just find it fascinating. It's like it's work that they enjoy and they expect to do it time and again. And so they'll put time into learning how to do it. But how do you overcome people say, like, I don't know if I can fix things?
So anybody who shows up at the Fix-It clinic, my first thing that I say to them is, so you understand anything we do here could make it worse. And if they laugh, I know they're the right kind of person for the event and I move them along. But if they're hesitant, I'm saying, maybe you should try to find professional repair for this and not have us do it. And then you've set up this condition where we're busy. I mean, lots of people come. And so they see that if they're going to get help, the best way they're going to get help is if they help themselves. So the tools are out there readily available. And I tell the Fix-It coaches, look, you don't have to really know anything specific about anything. All you have to do is give persons permission that it's okay to open up their thing that's already broken. It's already broken. What do they have to lose? It's going to go to the landfill. Let's extract as much learning as we can from it before we move it along, even if we don't fix it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, actually, that's a really good point. In some ways, people fear breaking something that is even broken, right? So, it's like taking something apart that you don't know that you can put back together. So there is some risk in that. Have you dealt with that, Elise, with people wondering how, how do I get good at this?
Right. I mean, one of the reasons that we did videos around our repair cafe, we could have just said, drop off your broken stuff. We'll call you when it's fixed, right? But we wanted to inspire people. And we wanted to share that that process. And you watch Adam in the videos, and he doesn't like edit out the parts that didn't work, right? You go through the whole repair, and he tries this thing, and it fails. And so he says, well, that didn't work. I'm going to try this now instead. And so giving it that sort of making it approachable, I think, and seeing that, he didn't build this suitcase, so he doesn't know how it comes apart, and he's going to try this, and then he's going to try that. And that's part of the process. So I think making people familiar with the trial and error that goes into repair can help.
And I'll add, to piggyback on what Peter said, I like to tell people that it's a learning experience, and you need to think of it that way, because I think what you often hear people say who don't want to repair something is that they don't have time for it. And I'll often say, well, do you have time to read a book? I mean, it's something that's educating you. It's not meant to be a punishment. It's meant to be an experience that you can gain a lot from. And it's not, you shouldn't measure the hours that it takes to get it done. It's rewarding. It's time spent doing something rewarding.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think a lot of times people think about fixing things and they think in dollar terms of, well, it would take me 2 hours and I only spent $20 on it. And that's not the point. Yes. The point is, it's your toaster and you like it, and it would be a pain to have to go to the store and get a new one. And why not keep the thing that you already love going?
Yeah, I think that's really true. I've always tried to explain the DIY side of the world. Not that it's cheaper necessarily. There's these other attributes like, hey, it's possible to do something and make something that you couldn't buy, but not necessarily that it's cheaper. I like what you say there, Kyle, of, extending the life of something is I mean, yes, there's economic sides of that, but if something works and it works well for you, keeping it going is really a tangible benefit, right?
Absolutely. You don't have to learn something new. You don't have to you think about a lamp. Think about a lamp in your house. Unless you're like massively redecorating, you don't probably want to replace any of the lamps in your house ever. You got them. It's in your house because you like it, right? And I would bet that lamps are a common item for you, right? Because I mean, if you have a lamp that breaks, well, you were happy with it before it broke. You want to keep having that lamp in your house.
Yeah. It reminds me of a story around the Pebble watch, which is one of the big crowdsourced watches, but you'll find people that still wear that. And they still use it. Peter, are you one of them? And, what happened? It sounds quirky, but, people they're used to it. They like it. It works. And why replace it with it's a doggone watch, and I think that's, a bit where the tech industry sometimes defines something as, well, it's Rev 2, Rev 3, Rev 4. It's getting better. And, to some degree, as we've seen with a lot of things that get bloated, that they're not necessarily better. They're more complicated. And Peter, talk about your Pebble watch.
No, okay, it has exactly the right level of functionality. Okay, right. It gives me messages from my phone. It has an alarm. I don't need it to do anything else. It lasts a week, on the battery, unlike the modern phones, so you have to charge them every couple of days. So, why? It's light. And at this point, if I lose it, I'm not crying. All right. So it's a perfect feature set. Right. But like you said, Dale, remember every bug started as a feature. And so this whole product churn cycle that they put us on, over time, why is it we're willing to relinquish our power for independent thought on this? That's one of the meta questions I ask about our whole consumer culture, as regards to why we chose to agree to get on this marketing, bandwagon around the latest and greatest.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about some initiatives that you've been involved in, Kyle, which is sort of the desire to pass right to repair legislation and to change really the manufacturer's role in this to both. Well, you tell us where it's at and what the status of it is.
Sure. Yeah. iFixit's mission is to teach everybody in the world how to fix their things. And we've been at it. We've been, taking apart manufacturers' products, taking things apart. With Apple, we got to a point where we were 100% comprehensive. We had an open source service manual for every product that Apple had made. That was pretty cool. And then when we tried to expand that to everything else, we realized that one, it was such a huge task. It was daunting, and we were, as big as iFixit is, we're kind of moving backwards relative to the number of products in the world. There's over 5,000 different Android phones on the market right now. So that's a challenge, the scope and scale of manufacturing. But we also realized that there's an element of responsibility that if you're a company putting products out in the world, you have a duty to take care of your customers. And some companies do a really good job of that. Dell and HP they have service manuals on their website. They'll sell you parts for their computers. But then you have other companies like Apple just successfully sued a repair shop in Norway for importing repair parts for the iPhone, claiming trademark infringement because Apple put their logo on a cable inside the phone. And then they're saying now, you're violating our trademark because you're importing parts. And so there is this kind of wave of, laws that were passed for one reason. Manufacturers have found that they can abuse them to prevent repairs from happening. And so it's time for consumers to push back. We need sound laws that protect consumers. And that's what right to repair legislation is about. It's based on how the auto market works. We didn't come up with the idea of right to repair. It's something that we have had for cars for decades, going back to the 70s. And there are laws that say that manufacturers have to share with the local independent mechanics the same information that the car dealers have. So if the Ford dealer has access to the schematic for a Ford Explorer, your independent mechanic should have access to that same schematic. And those laws have worked to create this really robust, high quality independent repair market that we have in the US. And so we said, well, let's do the same thing for everything else. And so legislation that we've been working on this year so far, it's been introduced in 20 different states, hasn't passed anywhere yet, says that if you're going to make a complex electronic product, you need to make parts, service, information, and tooling available both to consumers and to the independent repair organizations.
So it's still in California, you took one stab at it, and you're still going?
We're still at it. We're still trying. In Sacramento last year, Apple was walking around Sacramento with an iPhone showing people, hey, if you open this up, you might puncture the battery and hurt yourself. That's their argument.
Yeah, so misinformation.
In New York State this year, the organizations registered to lobby against right to repair have a combined $2.5 trillion in market cap. So this is an uphill battle. This is not something that will happen on its own. You can sort of think about the arc of history and say, what are things going to look like in 100 years? Well, either everything will be disposable and manufacturers will have complete control over everything, or we'll have a more open world where we can tinker and fix and maintain and upgrade and modify the products that we have. I think we're at a real fork in the road, and society is going to have to decide, do we want the Apple approach where the manufacturer dictates every possible thing that could ever happen to a product, or do we want something that's more open and inclusive?
Yeah, that, it relates to other things too. One of the things that COVID-19 was, there was an urgent need, at least expected to need, ventilators. And, the maker community and others said, hey, what's it take to make a ventilator? We can do this. And, one of the things that between industry and government, there weren't open specifications for what a ventilator is. You couldn't figure out what the parts are, and what the performance characteristics needed to be exactly. And even, government had sort of approves these devices, not because it tests them, but because the manufacturer warrants they perform a certain way. So in a sense, manufacturers controlling the whole process. And it's very hard to do an open version of things when you can't agree on it, because the FDA is not in a position to test instruction sets or look at parts. So it really, and another question I asked some of them is, well, are there ventilators out there that might be need of repair? And could we get them? It turns out we sell ventilators to third world countries that are in need of repair. We tend not to keep them around.
Yeah, the hospitals in developing countries are filled with our equipment from 20 years
ago. Yes, exactly. But even the ones in our stockpile that they brought out, there was a story that a company in San Jose rallied to help repair the ventilators that came out of the stockpile, that they didn't work. So,
and we've talked with a lot of the biomedical technicians who are fixing these things coming out of the stockpile. And you have common issues. You've got things like rubber gaskets that have degraded and need to be replaced because it's been sitting in storage.
Yeah. Lisa and Adam, do you get any sense that the makers in your community are probably are a little bit more interested in repair than the average consumer out there?
Within the Makerspace membership?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty clear. I do also feel like we've seen an increase in interest of just the general population throughout the pandemic as well.
Yeah.
People who wouldn't normally be thinking about repairing things. Of course, this is anecdotal too, but it seems to be an increased desire to repair things during this time. I can think of a friend of mine who his AC unit was leaking, and well, he actually tried to call the HVAC repairman, but they were so busy that he couldn't actually get him on the schedule. So he ended up clearing the drain line himself, figuring out that that's what needed to be done, clearing it and fixing the problem. And that's someone who wouldn't normally have thought about doing that.
Yeah. I think this may be forced upon us rather than chosen, but it's like these hospitals that are used to us, like just consumers ordering things and getting them in a day or two. Suddenly they couldn't order PPE. And the similar things is when a consumer, you're used to calling someone up and they'll be over tomorrow or the next day to fix it. Well, if they're in shutdown or they're not working or whatever, it's just a different response, and you have to begin saying it.
Some industries like professional appliance repair kind of ground to a halt for a while because normally they come into your house and they fix the appliance. People didn't want them to come in. And so your option is fix it yourself or live without a washing machine. And a lot more people are fixing things themselves. I can share, we have more than anecdotes because we've got the data of what's been happening on iFixit. And it's been dramatic. We have seen, traffic is up across the board. Some repairs are up 80 to 100%. One repair in particular has skyrocketed. It's probably 5 or 10 times the volume of repairs before. And that is the Nintendo Switch.
Oh, I saw some things on your site about that. Some controllers and things. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a manufacturing defect with the Switch, where the left Joy-Con gets a little off center and it drifts, and it's infuriating when you're playing. It almost makes it unplayable. And Nintendo acknowledged it was a manufacturing defect, and they had extended their warranty to cover this, and they were having people mail them in. Well, the pandemic hit, and they shut their repair centers down. And so the only way, and then of course the stores were sold out of new Switches, so you couldn't go and buy a new one. So if you wanted to keep playing games, the only option was to fix it yourself. So we have sold thousands and thousands of Nintendo Switch left Joy-Con fix kits. And it's a really, really easy repair. Overwhelmingly, everybody is successful with it.
That's great. You know, it's interesting how something like that sort of becomes viral. Like someone figures it out, and then other people say, "Oh, I can do that myself. I didn't know I could do that." So,
back in the day, it was the Xbox Red Ring of Death repair. The Xbox 360 would overheat and have a red light, and it would just not work anymore. And there were all kinds of interesting tricks. People figured out that if you wrapped a towel around it and like played Halo or some game that was really maxed out the CPU, the thermal would like reflow the solder inside and make it work again.
That's great.
So there's all these apocryphal, like you said, sort of viral conversations about how to fix Xboxes.
Yeah. Peter, talk about some of the virtual fix-it clinics. I mean, they're occurring around the world now, right?
Right. So I realized early on in this pandemic, we weren't sure what was going to happen. I mean, the things we've talked about in terms of trying to institutionalize repair or make it part of the civilization. Even before this thing started, I was thinking about how we start to repair civilization's assets, our community-owned assets, beyond repairing people's individual items. And so when this hit, I thought about Rahm Emanuel's quote, "Never let a perfectly good crisis go to waste." And I realized there was an opportunity here with people's attention fixed. There was no opportunity to have in-person events at all. We might as well go global, and we might as well go virtual and try to figure out how we can create that kind of crowdsourced ability to repair. Now, could we do repair remotely? So much of it is tactile. So much of it is hands-on. And the answer is not everything, but we're being pretty good at it. And we're having creating this wonderful global community of repairers who come to every event. I'm trying to create must-see TV for fix-it coaches. They all want to come and see what's happening this week, with virtual repair events. So they've been phenomenally successful. We're having another one on Saturday. We're having one 2 weeks after that. And I'm going to keep them going even as an augmentation to in-person events if and when those ever happen again. If nothing else, it provides repair to all those places in the world that don't have access to it. And to all those fix-it coaches who are on isolated islands because they don't have a local community repair event that they can attend as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another thing you've done, I think, Kyle, is I think you have a pro version of iFixit and other things that, there is a service business in repair, and there are people that make a living at it, informally doing some things on the side or formally having a repair shop. You're also involved with repair.org. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, the professional repair community is wonderful. I mean, this is where a lot of the innovation comes from. We learn from the pros, and then we distribute it to everybody else. And repair.org is the trade association for sort of the professional fixers. And it has been the pros who have been out there advocating for right to repair. All of us are, we want right to repair because we want to be able to maintain our own things. Well, for the pros, it's about their livelihood, right? When Nikon and Canon decided to stop selling service parts for professional cameras, all the camera stores around the country went out of business. You had thousands of people unemployed that were perfectly qualified to fix cameras. They just couldn't get the parts. So we love working with the pro community. They are amazing. It's really interesting to see these skills evolve. One thing we've been trying to get to happen in the pro world is this sort of open source maker kind of community where we're all sharing our ideas. That doesn't necessarily happen by default in the professional repair world.
Trade secrets.
Yeah, they're afraid of the shop down the road, right? Learning the trick that they have. And we've been trying to bring that ethos of no, let's get sharing happening. And one thing that's been really cool is that has happened with board level repair. So the people who are like fixing iPhone circuit boards, you can take a 64 gigabyte iPhone, and these pros can upgrade it to a 256 gigabyte iPhone if you want. It is not easy. I can't do it, but they can. And they're desoldering the chips and soldering it back on. And that global community of people learning how to do those board level advanced repairs and sharing it has been very open, and it's been really cool to see.
Yeah, tell me, is there if there's an amateur repair community and a pro community, how does one become a pro?
Start charging money for what you do.
But I mean, how is this just something you get good enough where you started to charge money, or do you go to school for it? Are there trade schools for repair?
High schoolers where they're doing repairs for their friends at school, and then you know. So
I mean, we've all seen it now that every mall has had a iPhone repair shop replacing broken glass and things like that. But that was an area that you guys had started off with.
The barrier to entry in consumer electronics repair is really low, right? Anyone can do it, and if you get reasonably decent at it, you've done it yourself a bunch, then you can start doing it professionally. It's not.
Yeah.
You don't have to be an Apple genius, right? There's not the magic they have behind the Apple Store that you can't have and set up your own shop, which is wonderful for entrepreneurship. And this is why, I mean, our estimates are in the last 10 years, there's something like 10,000 new cell phone repair shops in the US. You think about that job creation, that economic activity, those mall repair shops, those didn't exist 10 years ago. So how cool is that?
Yeah. Hey, one of the things you mentioned with the Nikon example is parts. And I think the supply chain is one of the real brittle things or fragile things that has broken during the pandemic. And it's been, so many things do come from China or outside the US in general. What do you, I mean, that's another side of this. I mean, you mentioned with Nikon shutting down parts or Apple or something, that they're controlling what can be available to the repair community, but also, the general supply chain can control that as well.
Right. Figuring out how do we create more robust supply chains is something that's really important. I wrote an article when the pandemic started for Wired about how we were going to see these seams appear, and companies have robust, resilient supply chains. So if they want to stick around a long time, they have to, right? You multi-source components, you have multiple factories that can make things for you. In a world where we can only get parts from the manufacturer, that's not a very robust, resilient world. What happens if the company goes out of business? My dog whistle company, I don't know if they're going to be around in business in a year. I don't know if this is a good business to be making dog tracking collar things. But I want to be able to keep using it for the next 10 years. So it is in the best interest of society to build these resilient supply chains. And unfortunately, the way that intellectual property laws work and have been enforced is really stifling that. There's a nonprofit called the Institute for Local Self-Reliance that has talked about this a lot.
Institute for Local Self-Reliance.
And they're all about local energy grids, local supplies. You think about all the things that make society more resilient. Well, you need everything, the food system, everything. It needs to be as distributed and replicated as possible, because if there's only one factory in one place in the world that can make iPhone screens, and it gets hit by a meteor or there's an earthquake or something, right? How does the rest of the world continue to function if we need iPhone screens?
Yeah. So Peter, that kind of leads into a discussion of circular economy. Also sort of local production, local resources. How are you thinking about that?
I'm with Kyle, and I'm thinking, with you and Make and with the maker movement, this whole idea that we've had this massive democratization of machining capability. It's coming down slowly, but there used to be the capabilities that used to be the purview of military defense contractors only. Machines that cost millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars now cost thousands of dollars, will soon cost hundreds of dollars. And if we tie that in with a digitally informed fabrication process, that means that the next time that Nikon camera part breaks, conceivably some digital file could get sent off to some local factory that makes you a new little nylon gear and ships it back to you to install. You start there. But then going even further, what I've been laying the gauntlet down with colleges and universities, I'm trying to find something non-threatening to the manufacturers, like a stick blender or a toaster or something, and say, how much of this device could we make in the San Francisco Bay Area, in Eastern Massachusetts? Yes, we'll have to source a lot of it from overseas at the moment, but over time, how do we make it so that the whole thing is essentially possibly manufacturable in a local service area using locally available tools, materials, processes, and services? So it seems like we're a long ways from that now, but I don't know, the rate of change is so fast at this point. It could show up faster than you think.
Yeah, I think that's, we've demonstrated there's a capacity to do it. It's possible, and we can do it rapidly. So rather than necessarily building a factory for one thing, you build a flexible factory that can do lots of things, and that factory might be a makerspace. But we have to think it through more, both on the basis of needs and what do we need that we don't have, or where is there an inability to serve kind of human needs in communities. And Adam, you were talking a little bit about that earlier before our call here about, I think both the maker community and others, we need to become more diverse to be able to deal with diverse needs.
Yeah, I'm just saying that even to know what problems need to be solved, we need diverse groups of people with diverse ideas and viewpoints and experiences that can bring those ideas to the table. There's so much innovation that can be found by going down that route. So that's another aspect of.
Yeah. And actually, Peter, you mentioned this, and Kyle too. That word innovation is really an interesting one to apply here, that thinking of repair as innovation. We often think of it as, I don't know, some end of life thing for a product, rather than saying, the ability both in the design of a product to be repairable, or as Joel Leonard wrote and asked about upgrading, so you can upgrade a component and improve a product that way. But even these ability to repair it, when we were talking about developing countries with secondhand medical devices, they actually have to become really innovative at how they repair these things, because often they can't get the parts. And that's something Jose Gomez Marquez has talked about at the Little Devices Lab at MIT.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that there's so much creativity that goes into fixing things and learning. If you can't get the part, you have to find something else. You got to come up with a supply chain. I'm constantly putting myself into situations where I'm going to have to learn how to fix something. So I have an opportunity to learn because I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get bored fixing the same thing over and over. I want something else to break so that I can learn how to fix it. I have on my table here, I have these are some Mackie speakers. So they're, just regular computer speakers. And about a year, maybe a year and a day after I had them, they stopped working. And it turned out that it was a switch. And I called up the manufacturer, Mackie, and I'll throw some shade at them because I had respect for them until I ran into this problem. They have no plan for service for this thing. So I realized the switch was bad. I couldn't get a new switch. So I soldered a jumper wire around the switch and just bypassed it. Now the speakers are fine. But it seems like every single person who has this Wirecutter recommended speaker system has the same problem. So I learned a lot about, reading the board and figuring out how to do that. I think there's a huge amount of creativity that can come.
Wouldn't it be great if Amazon reviews extended out to the life of the product, right? Not just what happened in your unboxing and first things, but what happened at the end of that product's life.
Give it away, you can update your review.
Yeah, exactly.
I have given both Consumer Reports and Wirecutter very heated feedback, and please, all of you, help me do this because they need to factor in the life cycle. You just rate products up front, and you cannot tell from the outside of a product from just using a product how long it's going to last.
Yeah, it separately, almost it'd be a fun kind of thing, maybe too much for most people, but just my wife and I were talking about how old the washing machine is. You forget, right? It's 30 years, maybe. We repaired it these times, right? But if we could be more aware of what the life of a product is, like how many times it was used, or sort of kept in use, maybe we would factor that into the when we buy something, we buy things that are better made and longer lasting, rather than things that just simply have the cheapest price. Because I think go on, Peter.
I'm looking to make everything immortal. You know, GE has this immortal engine. They have a turbine engine from the 1920s that they have digitized, and they have all the parts in the digital files, and they're constantly replenishing those parts, and they're improving it. They're providing continuous improvement to it. So I'm saying the same thing for all the white goods. Our refrigerators, our washing machines, they should basically last forever.
Yeah. Back to, you mentioned 3D printing there, and I think it was one of the great hopes around 3D printing, but I can't say I've seen it materialize, is that any part that you needed, there'd be, you could just download a file, a Thingiverse or something, and print it and replace it. Any ideas why that hasn't happened?
It's too early. I mean, nylon parts that you can make off a 3D printer aren't for everything. I mean, we see new metal processes coming on board. I've seen some milling machines. Additive manufacturing is not the only thing that's democratizing in terms of mass manufacturing capability at this point. So I think we have to find more of that stuff. I know I'm waiting for some sort of injection molding variant that's inexpensive, that you can do in low runs to come on board.
Right.
So
I think the key that we're missing really isn't the tools, it's the source files. I mean, that gear for the robot, it was a custom gear. It wasn't something I could find on McMaster-Carr. And if I was going to make it myself, I was going to have to model the thing myself. And that's an enormous amount of effort and a skill.
But there, at times there was, we'll scan it, right? And we'll have it in there. And it doesn't work that well, and all these problems with it. Then there's also I think there were several battles around IP. That is, if say iFixit scanned all these parts and put them up and they were good there, they're going to get sued by some manufacturers.
We're willing to try it. Please upload. You can upload 3D models to iFixit. People do. We've got some amazing 3D model repairs.
Because once you get that Cosmo gear right once, then everybody else gets to benefit from that, right? So
that's interesting. So Margie Preninger asks if there's a way to fix headphones. I'm not sure what the problem is, but one could guess that maybe those kind. There's probably a lot of categories of things.
Yes, there's a way.
Well, I think the answer I give to this question that I hear is that fixing things is not magical. I think people who haven't done it before, they attribute the failure of the mechanism to magic, for lack of a better word. Like it just stopped working. Well,
we don't know why.
You need to think through why. What other things happened? Is it making a noise? And is it a noise that could be a belt hitting on something or a bearing that's going loose? There's some physical action that has stopped working. It's not an act of magic.
There's a commercial on TV where people come into auto place and they say it's making this noise, and the guy says, it's that belt. And it actually would be kind of interesting to see what people say is wrong with something and what it turned out to be. And again, we don't know whether by headphones.
We never interrupt the person's narrative at Fix a Clinic because they often give us the hints that we need to effect a good repair. So if they just show up with a microwave and say it's broken, we're kind of hopeless. But they say, well, it won't work at all now, but we used to be able to touch this corner and it would start up, and that tells us everything we need to know about why it's not working.
Karen Corliss writes that a lot of manufacturers have big business in spare parts. Well, that's certainly true, and they do protect that business. But your auto industry example is a good one. There's a big business in third-party parts as well, right, Kyle?
Yeah, you have the option. You can go into the mechanic or go into an auto parts store, and you have the option. You can buy the aftermarket part, you can buy the OEM part, and you get to pick. You get to decide. I have an aftermarket bumper on my truck and it rusted, and that is on me, right? I probably should have spent more and got the OEM one.
Okay.
I had the OEM brakes on my Silverado and they rusted right through. I had to replace them.
Right. So we've learned at Fix a Clinic, it doesn't matter. There's a weak correlation between the price paid and the quality that you get. You can buy an $8 toaster from a drugstore or an $80 toaster from downtown store, and the failure mode can be exactly the same. The lifetime can be exactly the same. They might have even been manufactured in the same factory for all we know.
That's the real problem, is that consumers don't have the information to send the signal to manufacturers. You go into Walmart and you have the option, $20 toaster, $80 toaster, everything in between, and you don't know which one to buy. So if we're going to like do something to fix this, we need to get lifespan stamped on the outside of these products, right? This is going to be supported for 7 years, for 3 years.
Yeah.
And France
So I'm collecting the data. So I am trying through Fix-It Clinic to collect data over time, basically to be able to say over time, this brand of Mixmaster lasts this brand of blender lasts this much longer, and try to create some sort of a metric for that.
Yeah. They just keep changing model numbers so fast, though. It's hard. One of the things that I always find that puts me, it's more to do with clothing, but it's hard to find the same thing again in the market. Like if something really works for you, to replace it, it's often like, it's like your Pebble watch. Well, they went out of business. You can't buy the Pebble watch. You have to find it from someone else. But it's the things that work well sometimes don't exist anymore. Yeah. Well, listen, I think we've got all the questions in that I've had. Any final thoughts? Elise and Adam, do you think you'll keep doing repair cafes in person or virtual?
Yeah, so I think we'll have, we have a couple more repairs to do that we'll do as part of our virtual program. And then we hope to do them in person again someday.
I'd much prefer that.
Right. It's so much more, it's just more fun to like walk a person through that experience of why it's broken and how, and, obviously we all miss being with people. So yes, we will definitely keep doing them.
Let me ask you this. How do you deal with repair in a makerspace? Like things break because of use, and, people tend not to fix the problem they caused. Some do, but how do because one of Peter's comments that made me think about this, it's like when things are shared and they break, it's a different mindset than when it's yours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're pretty charitable with how we react to it, unless it was gross negligence on the member's part. We know that, well, take a bandsaw blade, it's going to break after enough hours of use, and it gets many hours of use. And so when it breaks, we buy a new one. And we don't charge people.
Let me phrase the question again a different way. So I've run into people who run maker spaces, and they kind of set up the maker space so they could make things, but all these other responsibilities come, and then at some point they tell me, I spend most of the time maintaining the machine so other people can make things and I don't get to make things. So how do you break that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's evolved a little bit as our space has evolved. We're 4 years old now. And so it depends. There are some members who have been here since day one when it was, tools on the floor and we had to build stands for them, and the tools were not high quality, and so they broke often. And there's people who are comfortable with repair, and they're comfortable within the organization, and they know that they can just step in and fix it, and they don't have to, ask for help or say anything. But there's other people who aren't comfortable with that. We recognize as an educational space, a learning space. Here are some of our young learners.
That's good. Speaking of learning.
So it's okay if people aren't comfortable making those repairs, and we want people to feel comfortable using a tool and knowing that if it breaks, that they don't have to be responsible.
Yeah,
but it certainly happens. And for anyone thinking about starting a makerspace, it's something you do have to consider. There's going to be maintenance required. And like Elise said, I think one of the best ways to buy yourself time is to buy better equipment. But of course, that's easier said than done.
Yeah. Peter, you're going to continue doing virtual Fix-It clinics and hopefully get back to doing in-person events?
Or some mashup of the two.
Yeah. Yeah, good. And again, they can find information on fixitclinic.com?
Org.
Well,
either one works.
Okay, good. And Kyle, what are you going to be working on in the next 6 months?
Well, we built this repair database for medical equipment. So we've been working with hospital repair technicians, trying to help them. A little bit outside of the DIY realm. I don't know if anybody's brought a ventilator into a fix-it clinic yet. But CPAP machines, certainly, right?
Yeah.
So we're now.
It's more that the medical equipment is coming into our homes.
Yeah. So we've been working on enabling and empowering the biomedical technicians. And then the other thing that we're really excited about is we've been dramatically expanding the amount of power tool repair information that's on iFixit. So we have thousands and thousands of schematics for power tools that you may not have seen before. So search for power tools on iFixit. You'll find some very cool new stuff.
Just maybe a last question here. Are any of you looking for fixers? I like that term. Has a different meaning in different contexts, but people who repair things. How do they get involved with your organization?
Always. iFix.com, head over to answers. There are always a stream of questions. Like these are real people who are stuck trying to figure out how to fix a thing, and they need your help. So certainly would love volunteers there.
And we have a very low threshold that, like I said earlier, you don't really have to know anything. All you have to do is give people permission that it's okay to open up their broken stuff. And certainly in the virtual fix-it clinics, anyone is invited to tune in and observe. You can just be in the background, muted, and just watch what the more experienced fix-it coaches do.
Right. Or you could become a pro and set up your business and be listed on repair.org. Right, Kyle?
That's it.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Thanks for being part of the conversation today. I hope we encourage a few people out there to think twice before throwing something away. And also, I will say that sometimes you discover that your teenagers can be really good fixers, and give it to them as a project. There's nothing lost if it breaks because you're going to get thrown out anyway. And even identifying components in a broken printer, you can harvest a number of different interesting motors and things in doing so. So it is a practice of the maker world. I'd love to think sometime about how do we encourage that practice? Like that, how do you, like if you might practice of 3D printing, you learn to do design, you learn to do all these other things. How do you develop the practice? I mean, it's sort of like debugging and programming. You have to throw yourself into it and just, but there probably are some tips and techniques to get good at repairing things.
So I'm biased, but I think that fixing is the on-ramp to making.
Yeah.
That every maker started as a fixer.
Yeah.
They were dissatisfied with something in their life, and they modified it.
And it could have been their life they were trying to fix too.
And my core demographic is, my core demographic is what I call the precocious teenager. It's the kid in the family who inherits all the broken stuff the family has, and he or she can be the hero if they can get the toaster oven working again.
Yeah.
I've got a 7th grader who fixes smartphones.
Yeah. Well, be a hero, repair something, extend the life of the things in your life, and do the world a good turn. So thank you, Kyle and Peter and Elise and Adam. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dale.
Thank you.